What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to Bubbles BuzzerBeater, your unofficial official BuzzerBeater YouTube channel. I am here with a familiar face. He was on just a couple videos ago to talk about a different topic, but today we're going to talk about point differential and BuzzerBeater, why we think that's a tiebreaker that needs to be changed, and it actually sounds like it is potentially going to be changed, and then also talk a little bit about a new world structure and repechage potentially changing. So there's a couple different things we're going to talk about, but Mediocrity, if you want to say hi and just let me know how you're doing.
Hi, I'm doing great. Glad to talk about point differential. As if you check out my team, I was the master of negative point differential this season.
I was gonna say, what does yours end up being for this season?
Minus 207.
Minus 207, but you were a playoff team.
Yep, 2 seed.
Yeah, so that's part of the reason why I think the PD structure could be changed for the better and look at, head to head and some other stuff. We'll talk about it a little bit later on because I think for certain situations, point differential still kind of has to stay. Like if you're looking at like league promotion, when you're looking at like which Division 3 teams are promoting up, point differential probably still counts for that unless you want to go off of like world ranking, but we can talk about that in a little bit. I guess the main reason it's come up again, and it's a topic that's come up a lot in the past, is for the USA national team. The America's Championship tournament has been pretty chaotic the last couple of weeks because there's just a lot of teams who are essentially throwing games, and it's incredibly frustrating for us because we actually missed out on semifinals at 4-1. But yeah, certain teams, and I don't even blame them, certain teams didn't want to go to repechage because it's a flawed system and they just wanted to kind of throw the last few games. So we actually had 2 teams take it easy on the last week of national team games and ended up costing the USA a semifinals match. But I guess you're a lot more involved with the national team than I am. What was the kind of thought process, or what was the emotions going through as you kind of figured out what was going on for the last few weeks?
Yeah, well, it was pretty obvious it was going to end in a 3-way tie coming into the last week. And before the last week, even Uruguay, they had ran a 6-man lineup against Mexico, which inflated Mexico's point differential. So they were currently in the lead, I think, coming into the last week. And so coming into the last week, everyone knew it was coming down to point differential. And I know every single one of the top managers in Argentina, Mexico, and United States were all sending messages around wondering what teams were going to do, try and figure out what they needed to do. And so really it was just the tiebreaker was coming down to who was going to play the team that was going to throw the game versus who wasn't. And both Uruguay and Peru played take it easy, and then Costa Rica played crunch time against us. And so we ended up not making it through.
Yep, pretty unfortunate. But that kind of leads to the conversation of, point differential as a whole, because in league games, a lot of times the tiebreaker is not as big of a deal. It can still lead to like seeding issues and whatnot, but for national teams and U21, it can actually lead to the difference between, making a semifinal and making worlds, and just a whole lot of implications there. So I know that you actually came up with a suggestion because lots of people have complained about this in the past, but looking at your suggestion that you posted in the suggestions forum, 13 plus 1 balls right now, so good job on that. But I know that you wanted to kind of switch the system to looking more at head-to-head record among the teams who are tied, and then looking at point differential among just the teams who are tied. That way the teams who are getting crushed and the teams who are throwing it doesn't really impact who's making the playoffs and who's making the semifinals off of that. Could you tell me a little bit about the system you came up with and why you think that's a good system?
Yeah, so the system would be you first do a tiebreaker, so you just have two teams tied, head-to-head record among those teams. Whoever won moves on. And then in the case like we had, where it was a three-way tie where each team had beat each team, so the head-to-head record was even, you look at the head-to-head point differential just among those teams tied. And then from there, you would go to what the tiebreaker is right now. And the reason for this, I mean, one, it's head-to-head records kind of the go-to for tiebreakers in sports. Um, like in the NBA, that's how they break tiebreakers, and it makes it so that the games that matter the most for if you're advancing are the games against the other teams that are trying to advance, and that prevents some of the bottom teams from their decisions really being the ones that decide who moves on, like it was in national team this year.
Yeah, and like you said, it's much more similar to the structure for the NBA, and it's also, according to Alonso, CM Alonso, he said that that is the exact system that the Euro League and local leagues in Europe actually use. So it just aligns a lot more with like real life as to what it looks like, and I think it makes a lot more sense because for MBBA teams and Division One teams, there's just a lot of games where you're like, I'm not gonna even play like capable players, but it shouldn't like negatively impact me if I'm losing by like 80 just because I'm not playing anyone.
Yeah, and I mean, in my case, at least for like league standings where I was losing games by a lot, I do think there should be some reward to the teams um, that aren't throwing games and focusing on league, but I mean that also reflects in the record as well. Um, but I think if you truly want to see which teams are better, you look at their head-to-head record because that's usually when both teams were trying their best, and whoever won is probably the better team.
Yeah, I'll say a long time ago I was actually an unfortunate soul who actually demoted from Division Three, and my record in the league was 12-10 with like a positive point differential, but I finished as the eight seed just because of how the league was structured. So it's always funny how things end up that way. But yeah, I had a couple funny league moments there where point differential came up um, pretty huge based on where I finished in the league and actually ended up demoting. So um, definitely interesting there. I guess tying into this, the other thing we wanted to discuss today was looking at the World Cup and potentially, you know, having more teams in it because right now the Rapid tournament at the beginning is kind of the system that's flawed that a lot of teams just don't want to be a part in because if you go into it and you start out 0 and 2, it's like not useful for you. It's almost more useful to just go to the consolation tournament. So BB Justin had talked about his thoughts and why he doesn't like it because teams who get off to a bad start, um, it's really hard to come back from that. And then he mentioned potentially looking at increasing the worlds to like 8 European teams, 4 Asia, 4 America, and 2 Africa as like a new model. When you're looking at that suggestion, does anything stand out to you, or I guess what was your initial thought looking at that potential suggestion?
I really like it, especially even for the teams that don't end up having to go to the repechage. They normally have three scrimmages, I think, to start the season. So the start of the season is super boring for those national teams or U21s.
Mm-hmm.
So get rid of that. It'd get rid of the dumb system of having teams go 0 and 2 into the consolation when they're probably the best teams in the consolation. But they have to start out at a disadvantage. So I like it for both those aspects, both preventing the teams from going 0 and 2 into the consolation and then getting rid of the first 3 weeks that are kind of boring.
Yeah, I'll say it would definitely help with because you wouldn't see what was happening in the Americas tournament happen with this new structure because there'd be no reason for teams to kind of tank out of the last few weeks like happened in this season. So I think it would fix that. And then, as for the balance of teams, I know Europe is kind of like the goaded the goaded continent team for a lot of world's teams and a lot of really good national teams come from Europe. So do you agree with the structure of 8-4-4-2 with Africa having two teams as well, or what does the balance look like in your opinion for that?
I mean, I agree with that balance that BB Justin had. I mean, obviously, Europe is under the current system. It's harder for your European teams to make it, and so you get a lot of really good European national teams that aren't in the competition. Not so much with the other continents. Usually, if you're good enough to make it in those other continents, you will make it. Whereas, it's different for Europe.
Yeah, I'll say which U21 team have you been managing at? I can't remember the exact team.
The Dominican Republic.
Gotcha. Okay. I'll say so for you I mean that gives you actually like a long hope shot of potentially making worlds. I know that would still be like a big stretch for that country, but I think it makes teams more invested in their continental tournament. And, there's a lot of teams like in Asia, if you're like, I know I can't stand up to like China, but if I know there's a couple extra spots available, that can actually really help me. So I think it also involves more people and probably gets more people involved in U21 and national team, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think it makes it more reward for being competitive in the continental tournaments. Whereas right now, for some teams, there's not much of an incentive.
Yeah. Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see what they look at doing. I'm not sure. These are obviously just like suggestions that have been put in the forums and kind of looking at, potential changes. So nothing official has come out. We're not saying that any of these things are for sure going to be implemented. But I think a lot of people would be on board with them. But did you have any other thoughts specifically on point differential or this new kind of world system that you wanted to bring up that we haven't really touched on?
I just think it makes no sense to leave it as it is, especially just for the national team competitions where you just get these weird situations where it all comes down to whether the team you're playing is going to throw it or not. And that happens in league a lot too. I mean, in the NBBA, we had a team sneak into the playoffs because they won their last game by over 100 points. It was like 130. So gets rid of some of that luck on the schedule and puts your fate more in your own hands.
Yeah, I was gonna say I was seeing a lot of people who are saying how they're like, oh, FD actually made the playoffs. I'm surprised, and I went and looked at what happened, and I was like, oh, my heart goes out to Arizona Cacti because he was like almost a lock to make it, and then ended up losing out by 3-point differential in a three-way tie for 12 and 10. And what you said it was like 130 points or something he made up.
Looks like 121 point
Oh my
victory
God.
to jump into the playoffs.
That's crazy. Well, yeah, so just another reason as to why, point differential might not be the best tiebreaker. That's what it's always been in buzzer beater. And I think that's what a lot of people said for a long time was, well, that's what it's always been. I'm like, well, just because that's what it's always been doesn't mean that's the best way to do it. And I think in the most recent seasons, in the last like 5 or 10 seasons, there's been a lot more changes and improvements coming to buzzer beater. So I wouldn't be surprised if they went out of their way to kind of fix this situation as well.
Yeah, I definitely approve of changing it.
Yeah, cool. Well, I think that's all we had today. A little bit of a shorter conversation, but I did just want to get Mediocrity's thoughts on it because I really enjoyed his suggestion, and it looks like one that could actually get put in place. So we will go ahead and let you guys go, but thanks for tuning in, and Mediocrity, thanks for joining me again.
Yeah, thanks for having me on again.